Hello, everyone. My name is Bertrand Evans Taylor. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at Dance USA. We're an organization that supports the dance ecosystem. And in my role as Director of Government Affairs, I essentially fight to create a legal environment that's beneficial to the dance ecosystem. And so that's in part dance organizations and in part dancers and all the like other workers that make things happen. I really do my best to put dancers at the center because without dancers, we don't have anything else. And so that's sort of what this conversation is about. Pulling apart like who all those workers are, what kind of power do they have, and what kind of power do you all have as dancers? It's really cool to meet with you all. Tony and Laurel told me a little bit about your program, and I think that's like super exciting. I love to see opportunities where artists can get paid to learn the things that they need to learn, and that's sort of what I'm all about. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from Oakland, California. I've been an artist my entire life. I've been playing piano since I was 8, and I'm not a dancer, but I always say a lot of the people that I love are dancers. So this work is important to me and meaningful to me. I'm just excited to be here with you all because we're movement workers. I do want to start with a quick icebreaker, and I call it the advocacy spectrum. I can see from the pillar on my right, so it's probably on the left, to the table that that person is sitting on. Can we make that a spectrum? And from the pillar, you're going to be there if you're someone who's new to advocacy, and you've never really spoken out about any issue. This can be in your personal life, your work life, your school life. If you've never done any of that, be on the pillar. And then we're gonna move up, and in the middle is gonna be I advocate in my dance spaces, but I don't know if it makes an impact. On the very far where that table is, I actively advocate and want to learn more about how to be more effective. For someone like that, maybe you've had an issue come up in your school or in your dance program, either been a part or led the effort to make a change in that way. And again, this could be anything. This could be in school. This can be at work. It can be at church if you go to church. But like you've exercised that muscle before. And so once we get up and do that spectrum, I want to do some introductions just so I can get to know who you all are. Um, and so for the introductions, it'll be your name, your pronouns, and why you chose where you are on the spectrum. If we could start with the person by the stairs, can you introduce yourself to me, please?
I'm Heaven Sheree, she, her, hers pronouns, and I picked my placement on the spectrum. I call myself an artivist. I made it my mission to use my art to advocate for myself and others like myself. And I'm actually working on a piece that's all about like Black advocacy at the moment.
My name is Aaliyah Mayo. I use they, them pronouns. I chose the space that I'm in because I'm pretty deep in the activism and advocacy space, but I would like to expand it more like locally, I guess. And I chose the space that I was in because I would like to figure out how the logistic like side of advocacy or activism works, like getting funding for like certain programs and things like that. Personally, I'm super focused on making dance accessible to like low income families. And I think, I have thoughts and have advocated for it, but logistically, like how to get the money for the things and, actually put it into fruition. That's right.
Jillian Cramschuster, she, her, and I just chose like in the middle because I feel more comfortable like advocating for myself, or like if there's something I don't feel is right, like in the dance spaces, but like, and I can bring it up and talk about it, but I don't know if it really makes a difference.
I'm Claudia. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm also in the middle because I feel like I've done some like advocacy stuff. Like I've done like walkouts at my school and like things like that, but not as much in a dance space. And I feel like a lot of the things that I have participated in, like I speak out about things, but a lot of the things I participated in were organized by other people. And so maybe taking more of kind of like what Aaliyah was saying, like learning more about the logistics of things and how to actually like make more of a difference myself and take more of the lead on some things too.
Hi, I'm Charles. I'm he, him pronouns, and chose the middle kind of beginning-ish. I have been a part of like organizations that or institutions that I would say that are bigger and broader and do kind of support, but then there's a lack of trickling that goes down. Like they're just kind of place you as a number, and then that's that. But then I feel like seeing and creating a community, like kind of instead of like making it local and kind of dispersing it out, changes the perspective of people and different ideas and the stereotypes and what the art is supposed to be, and changes within.
I'm Cam. I use he, him pronouns. I feel like I'm still like pretty new to advocacy, so like I'm trying to want to learn more ways that I can kind of be involved in advocating. But yeah.
Great. Okay, thank y'all so much. That's very helpful. Thank you so much. That will give me some understanding of what y'all already know. And I hear that a lot of y'all are listening for what are the things I need to put in motion for something to make something happen. But all of y'all have sort of a spirit for advocacy and making change. It's just how do I actually do that and put that into practice? And we can definitely talk about that. And I also think that makes a lot of sense, because one thing I really like to encourage is the idea we're going to use what we have to get what we want and get what we need. So as dance professionals, as dancers, y'all have incredible talent and incredible creativity. And so it's just about sort of like Heaven was saying, using that to make the change that you want to see in the world. My idea is if we all use the talents that we have, we're going to have a lot of options for how we're going to resist something. And also, I'm sure all of y'all feel as if now is a time for action, if no other time. I want to go over a little bit what is advocacy. So we call it big A advocacy and little a advocacy. So a big A means it's a proper noun and it's referring to a specific practice. And that is how we approach the government and ask them to make changes to the law. And so that can be through lobbying, which is going specifically to the elected officials and trying to convince them to pass a law or write a law or work on you with policy. But that can also be educating people about policy, educating people and asking them to do a specific action, like write a letter to your senator, donate to this PAC, try and get this specific person elected. And that's specifically what advocacy as a proper noun is. Little a advocacy can be activism, and I'll go over the difference between advocacy and activism, but little a advocacy is speaking out against something, and that's to make a broader change. What is big A advocacy versus activism? Big A advocacy fundamentally works within the system. And that means that you're going through the proper channels. You're showing up to board meetings, not to disrupt, but to participate. You're showing up to council meetings to participate. You're working with senators. You're working with Congress people, with executives, with the judicial system to make change through the systems that already exist. And advocacy is working to make change outside of those systems. So you, in general, would be on the outside looking in, whereas big A advocates are a part of the system. It's important to understand the difference because there are different strategies attached to them. What we'll be doing in this workshop is equipping you with the tools that you need to do advocacy within the system, but also give you sort of an understanding of how you should be strategizing to make the change that you want to make. Because sometimes working within the system is the best way, but sometimes it's not. And I'm not going to tell you, don't be an activist because advocacy works, but I am going to tell you to, have both tools in your toolbox, because it's about what you need that's going to determine your strategy. And so I think an example of that, the issue of leave after having a child. In a lot of other countries, you have a lot of time, some places up to a year. And here it's often 6 weeks. If you're trying to change that rule, what you're trying to change it to matters. Because if you're trying to make it a law so that employers have to do it, that's going to be a specific thing that you need to work with lawmakers about. But if you only want it to be at your job, you're going to be working with a different group of people who can change the policy at your job to be more generous or be less generous if that's what you want. But 6 weeks isn't very long. If you were an activist, maybe there's a specific organization enforcing a specific policy that is unjust. The workers have already tried to get them to change it. And so now people who, ideally stakeholders in that organization, are saying, okay, we see what you're doing and we're giving you pressure from our standpoint to change this because you aren't listening to the people who are actually affected by this rule. And so now we're showing up in your lobby. Now we're doing things that disrupt the system so that you start coming to the table to negotiate about this rule. The goals of this workshop, like I just said, are to establish a shared understanding of advocacy in both personal and systemic contexts, and understanding how you fit into making change. And so I'm going to give you all like a bunch of options on how you can go about making change. And so as you're listening, just be like, okay, well, I can do that. Or that's not really how I do things. And that's fine. This should be more of a like menu where you take what you can take and leave the rest than like you gotta take everything I give. This next part is understanding power and hierarchies in dance. And we're using dance because A, this is a dance workshop, but B, because oftentimes we find that systems in our wider world reflect systems in our personal life, but also because this will be something that will constantly come up as a dance worker. Especially now we're in a time where unionization is more popular and there's starting to be labor disputes and big ones in the news. You could be a part of that, but also you might need to be a part of that because of what's happening in your organization. I want to have a discussion about where do you see power operating in dance? This can be training, artistic leadership, funding, casting, or just in rehearsal dynamics. And specifically, who are the gatekeepers? Who's allowed to be their full selves in these spaces? And what systems uphold these privileges? What is a gatekeeper? In the dance industry, I would say that anyone who's a leader in a rehearsal space is a gatekeeper, even if you're just a producer making the space, someone who's providing water, someone who's running the list, or just like setting up the space. The way in which you create that space will determine who's comfortable in it and will determine who has the best chance of success in that space. For example, if you're neurodivergent and you do best in quiet environments, but you choose a audition space that's in a really loud office building or like an arts collective where there's a lot of hustle and bustle outside of the room, when you come into the audition, you might not be able to perform your best. And so in that way, like that producer is a gatekeeper. Can someone give me a few more examples of what roles a gatekeeper might be in? A lot of opportunities come from your peers. And so if they know about something that you don't know about and they're deciding who gets to know about those things, that makes them a gatekeeper. If you don't know, nonprofits are not like companies. They're not owned by someone. They're not owned by shareholders. They're technically owned by the public. The people who have ultimate control over that nonprofit organization is a board member. There are board members right now who are your boss's boss. Ironically, Abdo is the board chair at Dance USA. So Abdo is my boss's boss. That's just how it goes. So yes, board members are definitely gatekeepers. Did y'all understand what I meant when I said who is allowed to be their full selves in dance spaces? Can someone tell me how they interpreted that? I can also give the culture, like the ecosystem culture. Like when you go to a ballet studio and take class, you expect it to be ran a certain way. And so the fact that you have that expectation is because you've taken ballet before and you've taken class before. And to take class, getting into like access to dance education and spaces, you got to pay for those. And so you have to have access to the privilege to be able to take a ballet class. And in for a lot of folks, you have to be taking ballet at a very young age and be able to afford class and lessons and supplies and equipment for like pretty much your whole life to be able to participate and to be able to a certain degree, fit in. Like obviously, you don't have to do those things. Like Miss Copeland is a thing, but like that's the expectation, and the more you fit into that, the more privileges you will get because of the seniority, because of those organizations' values. I really wanted from this conversation for us to get an idea of like what elements go into making power and privilege. And from there, how do we appeal to that? How do we seek to diminish that? If we're making systemic change, how do we make it more equitable? And so if you want to change something, you kind of have to understand how it works and what it is. So the next section is strategies for effective advocacy. So this is going to be pretty high level. So the first one is just constructive communication. And what I mean by that is how are you talking about the things that you are expressing? And that's important because you're going to be talking to people who are biased against your issue, and you're going to be talking to people who have no idea your issue is a thing at all. As you're appealing to those folks, you have to shape your communication in a way that will help your case. And this doesn't mean conforming necessarily, but it does mean speaking their language and translating your message in a way that they will understand. In a dance situation, if you know that, let's say, the board members on your organization's board are all artistic directors or are all choreographers, there's certain language that you can use that you know they'll understand because they're choreographers, because they're artistic directors. In the same way, if you're appealing to someone on your board who's a lawyer and they don't have experience in dance, they just love dance, you know that they don't know the nitty gritty of what you're talking about. So you're gonna have to tweak your language so that it's easier for more people to understand, especially if you're making an appeal to the public. People in the public don't necessarily know how much goes into a dance piece. People in the public don't necessarily know how much rehearsal or how much you get paid or like how fair your working conditions are. And so you can't make assumptions about your reader's knowledge in a way that will make it difficult for them to understand. And part of that is understanding how you're perceived by people. A lot of people think that folks who are artists, the fact that they can be artists professionally is a privilege, and you should be thankful for that. And therefore, if that's what you're passionate about, maybe you don't need that much money to do the work that you do. But like, yes, it is a privilege to be a dancer, but it's also a privilege to be a doctor. It's also a privilege to have a job anywhere in the economy. That doesn't mean that people who work a job shouldn't get paid. And so when you're communicating, you have to be mindful of who's reading the work and who you're trying to appeal to get on your side. So now when we say on your side, who's on your side? So the next tool is coalition building. I really believe in the expression, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's because the more people you have as allies, the more likely it is to work because you have more resources to work with. But also, you're able to sharpen and refine your ideas by bouncing them off of more people. So going back to the constructive communication, like if Kim sees things one way and Heaven sees things another way, y'all can sort of find a common ground and start to understand how different perspectives work and how people see things differently. That can be part of your communication because neither of you are probably the only ones in the world with that perspective. And so the more perspectives, the more diverse those perspectives are, the more likely you are to succeed. Because you've thought about these things and you've heard these arguments and you've thought about responses to them. Bringing that back into the dance context, that's the whole point of being in the union. It's an organization that's already built a coalition that you're able to be a part of because you work where you work. And so when you have a problem at work, it's not just y'all six. It's not just y'all and the other dancers at Two Dance. It's the whole union machine. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes the threat of that machine to bring people to the negotiating table to do things that are fair. When you have those allies, that's what it's going to be. Like, it might be like, okay, let me get everybody who goes to this specific 9 a.m. class on a Zoom call so we can talk about the fact that class really needs to start at 9:05 if y'all are going to be late anyway. If the instructor is going to be 5 minutes late all the time, why am I paying for 5 minutes I'm not getting? And that's like just a super small example. If everybody who takes the class and pays for the class comes to you like, we have a problem, you're going to listen. So that's what coalition building is all about. And like in an advocacy situation, Dance USA is a part of many coalitions. Some of them are super formal where you pay annual or one-time dues to be a part of, and they hire lobbyists, they create ads and run press releases and all that kind of thing to like get the ball rolling on your issue, all the way down to less formal ones where it's like, okay, we all work in this space, so let's come together every month and just share information and talk about what's going on. To more grassroots things where it's like, okay, we all live in this neighborhood, we all know this is a problem, we're going to the city council. All of those count as coalitions, and they're all built out to do a specific purpose. As I'm encouraging you to be advocates and activists, we also have to like be clear that at any time you're going against the system, there are risks involved. And so the other tool is understanding risk, and understanding that the reason things are in place is because if you go against it, there will be consequences. It's important to understand what those consequences are, but also either how am I going to mitigate them, as in, let's say you go public about an organization's rehearsal practices. If you're in a union and you go through the union, they can help mitigate the risk of you getting fired because there's contractual obligations that that organization has to meet. But if you work at a place without a union, you have, I have to get every employee in here or every dancer in here to work with me because they're going to have a lot harder time firing all of us than firing just me. But as you all have probably seen, they will fire all of you. That can be a thing. And I'm not going to pretend like it's not on the table because it is. Like, and so whenever you go against something, you have to be mindful of what could happen. And the idea is that what you're engaging in is a principled struggle, which means that my job is not as important as this as a value. Like, it's not as important that what happens to me will happen as it is that what I'm fighting for is fought for on the like really extreme end. But everyone is familiar with Martin Luther King Jr. The night before he died, he gave a speech called "I've Seen the Mountaintop." And in the speech, he said, "I've seen where it is we're going. I may not make it there. I may not survive to see it, but I've seen it, and I'm telling you it's possible." He didn't know that he was going to get shot that day, but he knew any given day, because of the things he said, he might be killed for it. And because this was the principle that he was standing on, because this was his purpose and his calling and where he knew that he was supposed to be, he was comfortable with that. And so now I'm not saying you should be comfortable with getting assassinated. I'm not comfortable with getting assassinated. But what I'm saying is that when you're deciding what are we going to struggle for and what are we going to struggle against, you have to be realistic about what might happen and understand like what you're going to do if that happens and what are you willing to sacrifice for this to be a thing. And it might just be money. I'm willing to spend some money on this so that people can actually hear my message. But it might be your job. And that doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but like you should be clear-eyed about that. We're going to get into another activity. This one will be called power mapping. What we're going to be talking about, we're going to sketch out the dance ecosystem's power structures. Think about directors, board members, dancers, donors, attendees, students, teachers, all of those roles, we're going to put in a rough hierarchy of like who has the most power, who has the least power in the dance ecosystem. The goal of this is to identify where power is concentrated, but also where dancers have influence. The idea is that when you're deciding what you're going to advocate for, you have to decide who you're going to advocate to. So, for example, if you have a problem with the fact that your contract says rehearsal will be done at 10 p.m., but rehearsal consistently ends at 11:30, who do you talk to about that? You can talk to the artistic director about that, and they may be able to help you out, but they're not the person who holds that necessarily. That's probably HR or your rehearsal director. And so the point of this exercise is to look at different roles and sort of map out who has the most power, who has the least power. Because, like, again, if you just go to someone's assistant, they might have some influence over what that person does, but they can't make that change themselves. So they may have some power, but they may not have all of the power. I think it would be easiest to start in highest. Who has the most powerful role in the dance ecosystem?
The board.
The board. Who else?
Donors.
Donors. I'll throw one in. The people who decide who gets Tonys, the Academy.
Funders.
Funders, which is different than donors. One that's also kind of different, investors, if you're looking at the commercial side, especially like for Broadway. So let's go down to mid-high. I think a great example of a mid-high would be an executive director. They have a lot of decision-making power, but they still answer to somebody. I would say a producer. So let's go to the mid-low. Who would you say is at the mid-low? Okay, teaching artists. Thanks, Heaven. I would say choreographers. Where would you put a rehearsal director? Would that be mid-low or mid-high? Where would you put a dance professor? I can see that. Like, not only do they mold how people dance in the future, they also they tend to be pretty well connected. especially if they have tenure. So what about the chair of your dance department at a university? I think that's fair. I'm noticing no one has mentioned dancers. Where would you say they are? Okay, I would put technical contractors. So like the people who do the lights, the people who are stagehands, especially as contractors. Where would you put a production assistant? Can anyone think of any other roles that we should map on? Okay. And obviously, none of these are hard and fast or rules. This is like social. And so there might be some professional dancers who sit on boards of direct, some professional dancers who are also donors, or just because they're so stellar, they have more influence than an artistic director or a producer might have in that space. So this is not like to say like this is how it is and has to be. Not definitely not how it has to be, but this is, like I said, a sketch of sort of how we see the world. I can understand why you would put dancer at the lowest. Yeah, I think it's often portrayed that way. Like I said at the beginning of this, without dancers, we don't really have dance, right? As dancers, and this is something I want you to think about throughout the rest of this workshop, as dancers, what power do you have, even if you may be in the lowest tier? Because rehearsals don't happen if you don't show up, right? Companies can't meet their quarterly goals if they don't have teachers or teaching artists, if they don't have a rehearsal director or a choreographer, right? And oftentimes, as artists, you all move between those roles throughout your lives and throughout your days, your weeks. Like some places you are running rehearsals, some places you're a choreographer, some places you're just a worker, like as a dancer. Really think about like what is the power that I have, and especially what is the power that we have as a collective. Because I'll tell you that all the students in a dance program probably have more power than a professor, one professor. They may not be able to get that professor fired because they have tenure, but that doesn't mean they can't get a policy change. That was the power mapping activity. Next, we're going to do another group exercise around how would you advocate in future dance spaces. I want there to be two groups of three. I want two of you all in that group to be an employee and one of you to be a power holder. As by power holder, it'll change depending on the scenario. We're going to choose from three scenarios. Fair pay, which you can interpret for your scenario however you'd like. Someone's getting paid more than someone else, or everyone's not getting paid enough. Discrimination and rehearsal conditions. You're going to decide who's the two employees, who's the power holder. You're going to role play. So you're going to develop an approach. So the first question is, who's your advocacy target? So the three of you will decide who that power holder should be. So if it's rehearsal conditions, maybe that power holder should be the rehearsal director or someone else. And then what do they need to understand your perspective? And I'm going to put this on the screen too. But that goes back to the communications. And a big question about that is how do you want them to feel when they hear your appeal? And that should guide your communications. If you want to piss them off, you probably know how to like say an angry message that will get an angry response. But if you want them to, and that's like that can be a strategy. If you want them to empathize with your situation so that they can be emotionally moved to make a change, that's going to be a different appeal. And so then, especially when you're looking at fair pay and discrimination, but also rehearsal conditions in terms of contractual obligations, are there any relevant laws that should be considered? Is what you're advocating for against the law? Are you asking them to break the law? Or what you're advocating against is that against the law? Like, you're paying me differently because I'm a woman, that's illegal. So are they breaking the law? And if so, how do you use that as part of your leverage? Like, okay, if you don't change this, I have grounds to sue. If you don't change this, I'm going to tell the union that this is happening. If you don't change this, XYZ, because this is against the law. So it needs to change. And then, like we've been talking about, what power do you hold in this scenario? What do they need you for? How can you resist? Because that's going to be really outside of like empathy and solidarity and support. That's going to be the things that get them to change, even if they don't want to change. What do they need you for? And what are some ways that you can create friction between the goals they're trying to accomplish with you and the goal you're trying to accomplish in terms of your mission? So, fair pay, you're paying women differently than men. Maybe the women come to rehearsal, but only sit at the sidelines and only watch rehearsal, but don't participate. And that's the resistance. Again, there will be consequences for that, and there are risks involved to doing that. But this is the principled struggle. So how can you resist? And so then, of course, there's the actual role playing of like your two employees making an appeal and one person's playing the power holder. And so like you're going to make your appeal and then the power holder is going to make a response. And then you're going to have a second response for that power holder. And that'll be the scenario. I just wanted to clarify that like this role playing exercise, everything except for choosing the scenario, because you're just going to be in the scenario, is how you would start an advocacy campaign. You're going to come together in your group and you're going to be like, yeah, I don't like how this is. And I would recommend when you organize those communities, organize about what you want to create, not what you want to destroy. That's going to give you a lot more motivation, but also once it's destroyed, what are we going to do next? And so like when you organize around what you want to create, that answer is already clear and it starts becoming clearer as you start fighting. But also it's constructive. Develop your approach. How are you going to get what it is you want to create? That was a lot. I'm going to put it on the screen. What I really would like y'all to take away from that is the reason we rehearse these things is because when you're in this situation, you're going to be feeling a lot of emotions, right? Like you're fighting for yourself, you're fighting for people that you care about, you're fighting for your community. And so the more that you've rehearsed it beforehand, the more you're able to like step out of that and be like, okay, what is it we need to do? Not to ignore the emotions, but to direct them in the way that you need them to go to be the most effective. And so I really want to encourage you, like we sort of talked about, when you're doing your advocacy work and when there's time, practice what you want to say, practice your message, talk to people in your life, see how they hear it, but also feel free, like you all have the notes for this, feel free to use this with other people. Like we're going to do some exercises and we're going to rehearse advocacy and just build on that muscle. Maybe like you're teaching people about advocacy with these notes, like I'm doing. Go for it. And more than that, like you're like more likely than not, you're probably going to be in a situation where the rehearsal conditions aren't great, where they got y'all rehearsing on concrete, they got y'all with loose bars, like they said, or spaces that aren't clean. Because I know people before COVID, they would have people who are choreographers and needed studio time earn the studio time by cleaning, which is equitable and a great way to give people chances, but they might not be the greatest cleaners. And so you might have to be like, yo, like this isn't working. This isn't it. And so like being able to speak up for yourselves in those situations and knowing how to approach it is going to be important to make sure that you're being paid what you're worth, but also that you are being treated how you should be treated. And even if it's something you're okay with, so that people who come after you don't get treated the way that you've been treated. In your advocacy, in your moments where you're choosing to advocate, that's what you should be thinking about. And that goes back to that principled struggle. Like, this is against my principles, and it's worth getting written up for. It's worth losing my job for. It's worth like being blacklisted. Like, you have to decide those risks for yourself. And so that's not something I can teach you. But like, I'm trying to give you some opportunities to think about it before you have to do it. So before I have some more information about local advocacy, especially since someone brought it up. We can talk a little bit about funding. Obviously, this was a lot of our work was about in the studio, in dance organizations. But like I said, these hierarchies are reflected all throughout our society. The interesting thing about advocacy outside of the arts is that now, like, your artistic ability, your skill, your talent, your creativity is a tool that you can use for advocacy. And we have an artivist in here, so like that's not lost on y'all, but like be clear that like this, like, art can change people's minds and can change people's hearts. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a like hack, changing people's ideas without them even being like, okay, I'm being persuaded right now. I'm about to hear these arguments, da da da. I want to encourage you. I know there's a lot of things going on federally right now, and I'm not going to say don't pay attention to that, but I would really like to encourage you to pay good attention to your local and state advocacy, because that's where you can make a lot of difference and a lot more difference. So like local and state advocacy is going to give you a lot more power compared to like who you are. So like you're one person, and when you show up to your city council, it's going to be a huge difference that you're one person speaking up about this, because people don't always come and talk about your issue at all. And so when they're like, oh, there's someone who cares about these labor regulations, now it's gonna be in the minutes that that's what was discussed, and it's gonna be one of maybe 3 issues that got brought up by the public. But in that same regard, if all 6 of y'all come and all 6 of y'all testify about an issue, now that's gonna be like a page in the minutes, right? And so not only is it recorded in the rules, but it also, they have to read back those minutes in the next meeting, right? So now they're spending more time thinking about your issue. But also they're gonna be like, oh wow, 6 people came. 6 people don't even come to our meetings, right? Like, I've gone to some city meetings where I'm the only consistent person who comes to the meeting, especially like our arts and culture council in your local area. They don't get a lot of public participation. And so those are places where you can make significant change. I know folks who work in the foster care space, and they've gone to the state house and they've made it so that foster people in the foster care, when they turn 18, they receive resources to help them get their first place, help them find a job, because those are things that parents usually do, that as wards of the state, they were able to make the argument like, this is your responsibility. They made it so that the state would pay for them to get driving lessons and a driving license, because A, driving is a necessity in a lot of cities in Colorado, but B, because how do you get a job without an ID? and a lot of people in foster care move around so much, they don't always have access to all of their documents. And so they need that help. So they were able to advocate as professionals who see this day in and day out that this is a law that needs to be changed. And the biggest thing is that these state and these local laws are going to help insulate you from things that are crazy in the federal, on the federal level. So, for example, minimum wage. It's a great example. There are certain cities where the minimum wage is $15 an hour. So if in 20 years the federal minimum wage is still $7.25, it doesn't matter because in that city it's 15 an hour. And in that state, the minimum wage is $10 an hour. And so you can change your environment even if the country isn't doing the same thing. And a lot of times, federal laws that get put into place have been experimented on the state and local level already. I don't know if you all have heard, but there's a lot of experiments on like a universal basic income. We can fight for that to be federal, but a lot of people are going to want to know, well, what are the effects of that? So people have been doing studies. And then maybe we can find a really progressive city with the right type of people, and we can put it into practice at a city level and show the state, like, hey, this has a lot of benefits. Let's try it. And then once you do that in 2 or 3 states, you have worked out a lot of the kinks that show up, and you can put together a really solid federal bill that has like evidence behind it for how you're going to get these things done. You can make a really big difference just going to your local arts council meetings, because that's where people are deciding how they're going to spend the city's money. That's where people are deciding the rules for who gets the money. And that's where people are deciding how the city is going to represent itself in terms of art. So if you don't like that it's just the Minneapolis Ballet getting 80% of city funds for dance in the city, that's where you would start. And that may not be everyone gets more funding, but it may be that that's good because they provide dance lessons to everyone in the city or whatever. Like, I'm not saying ballet companies are problematic necessarily, but what I'm saying is you have to go back to who holds the power and how do you convince them. And showing up at their meetings month after month after month is a great way for them to be like, okay, well, this person cares and they actually show up, so let me listen to them. So that's my spiel on local advocacy. Oh, and the last thing is I'm working on the federal level at Dance USA, but I am not working on the state and the local level. And that's because each state, each city has their own requirements. And at the where I'm working, I can't keep up with all of those rules. And so there's also an infrastructure operating at the federal level. And I'm just one guy, but I am representing dancers within that infrastructure. But that might not be the case at your local level. And so if you want to get involved at your local level, just Google Minneapolis or St. Paul Environmental Protection Organization or Environmental Protection Coalition or working group, or like sometimes it might just be people, we meet up every Tuesday for dinner and we talk about environmental protection. And I promise you those groups exist in your area and they exist in most areas. And if they don't, maybe you should start it. You can reach out to an organization in a city near you and tell them, I want to start this in my city. Can you help me do that? And oftentimes, if they have the capacity, they will guide you on how to set these things up. In terms of funding, because I know that came up, it depends on what you're trying to do, because grant funds come with strings. Donors come with strings. They have certain expectations and there's limits to what it is they want to see in the world that they want to create, that they're going to put their money towards. But like, if what you're doing is more grassroots, maybe a crowdfunding campaign makes more sense because it's funded by the people that you're trying to help. And there's a lot of different platforms that help you crowdfund for the type of issue that you're trying to do. But it also is the case that maybe you approach a Dance USA or a theater communications group and you're like, this is a change I want to make. Can you support me in that? And we can decide like, okay, is this part of our vision? And if it is, I work with a folk music organization, and we told them like, y'all don't have nearly enough Black musicians at this conference. Like, for this to be such an important conference for folk musicians to be at, y'all don't have enough Black musicians. And so now we do the Black American Music Summit that's specifically for Black musicians at this conference to help create a sense of belonging and help them navigate the conference so that they can get booked more and make more money and be more successful in the folk music arena, because we're out here, but it's hard to tell because we're not showing up in these spaces because we don't feel like we belong. I would say they funded about 30% of it, gave us free rooms, gave us free showcase spaces. And like, that's not all of the funding. We had to do some fundraising, but like, that's some support, institutional support that we were able to get. If any of you have any specific questions or want to continue pulling a thread that I brought up, like one-to-one, feel free to email me. We can have a Zoom call and talk about it, or we can just email back and forth. Feel free. I know it's lunchtime, so I'm going to let y'all get to your lunch, but thank y'all so much for engaging. Yeah, I hope y'all got some nuggets you can take away.
Many nuggets.
Great. Wonderful.
Thank you for the generous your time to stay too, Bertrand.
Of course, of course. Y'all have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully I'll see you around the ecosystem.
Thank you. Awesome.